If you dare have this baby, I will destroy your entire family." 5 years later, the same man fell to his knees and touched her feet, begging for forgiveness. "Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories, your own family channel. May the Almighty wrap every woman in a protection so strong that no sorrow can touch her, a peace so deep it quiets every storm inside her, and a love so pure it brings light to every corner of her life. May He bless the hands that cook, the feet that walk endlessly for others, the hearts that break silently yet still choose kindness. May every woman who has carried pain alone be lifted with honor, wrapped in comfort, and rewarded with blessings beyond measure. You deserve a world that treats you gently, speaks to you softly, and respects you endlessly. And my beautiful family, I see some of you not staying till the end, not liking, not commenting. Sometimes it hurts. It makes me wonder. Have you forgotten your brother, Mr. Peter? Or do you think I am done? Tell me honestly, what is the reason, my family? If your heart is true, like the video. If your love is real, right, I am with Mr. Peter. The pregnancy test sat on Darren Warren's marble countertop like a bomb waiting to detonate, and Binta Peter watched his face transform from confusion to horror, to something far more dangerous. You cannot be serious right now. Darren's voice dropped to a whisper that made her blood freeze. Do you understand what you're asking me to do? Binta's hands trembled as she tried to steady her breathing. I'm not asking you to do anything. I just thought you should know before you what? He moved closer, and she instinctively stepped back until her spine hit the window, overlooking Seattle's glittering skyline. Before you ruin everything I've built, everything my family has built? Darren, please, her voice cracked. I know the timing is terrible with your engagement and the company going public, but I can't just... Yes, you can. His hand slammed against the glass beside her head, making her flinch. You absolutely can, and you will. My engagement to Senator Blake's daughter is front-page news. Our IPO launches next month. Do you have any concept of what's at stake here? Tears burned behind Binta's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not yet. Not in front of him. What about what's at stake for me? This is a life, Darren. Don't! His finger jabbed toward her face. Don't you dare finish that sentence. There is no our anything. There's my life, my future, my family's legacy. And then there's you, a nursing assistant I was stupid enough to sleep with when I was slumming it at charity galas. The words hit her like physical blows, each one stripping away another layer of the foolish hope she'd carried into this penthouse. She'd known Darren was ambitious, driven, sometimes cold in his business dealings, but she'd believed that somewhere underneath the designer suits and corporate armor was the man who'd held her on his yacht last summer, who'd whispered that she made him feel real for the first time in his calculated life. That man was a lie. I see. Binta straightened her spine, forcing strength into her voice. Then I'll leave. You won't have to worry about me or this situation ever again. She turned toward the door, but Darren's hand shot out and gripped her arm hard enough to bruise. You think it's that simple? You think you can just walk out of here and make whatever choice you want without consequences? Let go of me. Her voice shook, but she met his eyes with all the defiance she could summon. Darren's smile was a predator's grin, calculated and cruel. Your mother, Binta, she gets her dialysis treatments at Warren Memorial Hospital, doesn't she? Our family owns that hospital. Our board decides which patients receive continued care and which ones get transferred to public facilities with waiting lists that stretch for months. Binta's stomach dropped. You wouldn't. Your younger brother, smart kid, full scholarship to Warren University, studying engineering. Our family endowed that scholarship program. One phone call and his funding disappears. No degree, no future, all that potential wasted because his sister couldn't think beyond her own selfish desires. Stop. The word came out as a whisper. Your father's construction company, those contracts he has with Warren Pharmaceuticals to build our new research facilities, gone. Not just gone, Blacklisted. I'll make sure no major corporation in this state will touch him. Your entire family's income stream destroyed. Binta felt the room spinning, her carefully constructed world collapsing around her. She'd come here hoping for support, or at least understanding. Instead, she'd walked into a nightmare. Darren leaned closer, his breath hot against her ear. If you dare have this baby, I will destroy your entire family. Your mother will die waiting for treatment. Your brother's dreams will turn to ash. Your father will lose everything he's built, and it will all be because of your selfishness, because you couldn't do the one simple thing I'm asking of you. You're a monster. Her voice barely functioned. No. Darren released her arm and smoothed his tie, his face returning to its usual mask of controlled composure. I'm a realist. I'm a man who understands that sometimes difficult choices have to be made for the greater good. My family employs thousands of people. We provide healthcare to entire communities. We fund research that saves lives. And you want to jeopardize all of that because of one mistake? It's not a mistake. It's a human being. It's a cluster of cells that will ruin both our lives if you let it. Darren walked to his desk and pulled out a checkbook. I'm going to write you a check for $50,000. You'll use it to take care of this situation discreetly. You'll sign a non-disclosure agreement, and then you'll disappear from my life completely. This is the most generous offer you're going to get. Binta stared at the check he held out to her, and something inside her shattered. Not her resolve, but her illusions. Every sweet word he'd ever spoken revealed itself as manipulation, every moment of tenderness exposed as performance. She'd given her heart to a man who saw her as nothing more than a problem requiring a financial solution. Keep your money. She turned and walked toward the elevator, each step feeling like walking through water. You're making a terrible mistake, Binta. Darren's voice followed her, losing its calculated calm and revealing raw panic beneath. If you do this, if you keep it, I will make good on every threat. Your family will suffer because of your choice. Can you live with that? Binta stepped into the elevator and finally let herself look at him one last time. He stood in his perfect penthouse, wearing his perfect suit, surrounded by his perfect life, built on cruelty and threats. And she realized, with devastating clarity, that she'd never really known him at all. I don't know what I'm going to do, she said quietly, but I know I can't stay in the same room as you for another second without losing myself completely. The elevator doors closed on his face, and Binta collapsed against the wall, her whole body shaking. The descent felt endless, each floor taking her further from the man she'd loved and closer to an impossible choice that would define the rest of her life. When she stumbled out into Seattle's cold rain, she walked without direction, her mind replaying every threat, every cruel word. She found herself standing outside a women's clinic, its warm light spilling onto the wet sidewalk. Through the glass doors, she could see a waiting room with other women facing their own impossible decisions. Binta's hand moved to her stomach, still flat, still unchanged, but carrying a life that had already cost her everything she thought she knew about love. She stood in the rain until she was soaked through, unable to move forward or back, trapped between Darren's threats and her own heart, knowing that whatever choice she made would haunt her forever. The city moved around her, cars passing, people hurrying under umbrellas, the world continuing as if her entire existence wasn't balanced on a knife's edge. She thought about her mother, hooked up to dialysis machines 3 times a week, her body dependent on treatments Darren could end with a single phone call. She thought about her brother, brilliant and passionate about engineering, his future funded by a scholarship Darren could revoke. She thought about her father, proud of his construction business that he'd built from nothing, contracts that Darren could destroy with casual cruelty. And she thought about the life growing inside her, too small to see or feel yet, but already real, already hers, already loved, despite the terror of what carrying it meant. Binta finally moved, but not toward the clinic. She walked to her car, started the engine, and drove away from that bright doorway with its promise of solving her immediate problem. Because even terrified, even alone, even facing threats that could destroy everyone she loved, she couldn't walk through those doors. She couldn't let Darren's cruelty determine whether this child existed. That night, in her small apartment, Binta made the decision that would define everything that came after. She would have this baby, she would protect her family, and she would disappear so completely that Darren Warren would never find her, never have the chance to make good on his threats, never know whether she'd complied with his demands or defied them. She would become a ghost, and her child would be born free from the man who'd tried to force him out of existence. Chapter 2. Vanishing into silence. Binta Peter ceased to exist on a Tuesday morning when autumn leaves covered Seattle streets in copper and gold, and the woman who would become Binta Okoye began her transformation into someone unrecognizable and unfindable. She withdrew every dollar from her bank account, not much, barely enough to survive a few months, but it was cash that couldn't be traced through electronic systems or credit checks. She left her apartment with only 2 suitcases, everything she'd built in Seattle abandoned without explanation or forwarding address. The landlord would wonder, her co-workers would gossip, but no one would truly look for her because people disappeared from cities every day for 1,000 different reasons. The bus ticket to Montana was purchased with cash from a stranger at the station who sold tickets unofficially for slightly less than official prices. No record of her name or destination entering any database that investigators might search. Her phone went into a dumpster behind the bus station, still powered on so the last location ping would show Seattle and lead anyone searching in the wrong direction. Her credit cards, snapped in half with decisive cracks, followed into the trash. Her nursing license, her social security card, every piece of identification connected to Binta Peter, hidden in a safety deposit box she'd never access again, creating a clean break between who she'd been and who she needed to become. Every digital footprint, every connection to her old life, deliberately erased with the thoroughness of someone who understood that survival meant complete disappearance. She couldn't risk Darren tracking her, couldn't risk his investigators finding her family through her movements or purchases or communications. The disappearance had to be absolute, leaving no trail that could lead back to the people she was trying to protect from his promised destruction. The bus ride stretched endlessly through mountains and plains, each mile taking her further from everything she knew and everyone she loved. Washington gave way to Idaho, Idaho to Montana, the landscape becoming emptier, wilder, more isolated with every passing hour. Other passengers slept or read or stared out windows, oblivious to the woman in the back row whose entire existence was dissolving like smoke, whose carefully built life was collapsing into a backpack and a single suitcase. Binta kept her hand on her stomach throughout the journey, feeling nothing yet, but knowing something lived there, something Darren had demanded she destroy. The pregnancy was barely real to her body, but completely real to her heart. This child had already cost her everything, and she would make sure he never knew that terrible price. Her grandmother's property sat at the end of a dirt road where Montana's wilderness swallowed the modern world whole, where cell signals died and internet connections never reached, where a person could truly disappear. The old woman had died the previous winter, leaving behind a weathered house that hadn't seen electricity in decades. No neighbors within miles, no postal service, no witnesses to watch Binta Peter disappear and Binta Okoye emerge from her ashes like something reborn through destruction. The house smelled of dust and memories when she pushed open the creaking door, filled with her grandmother's belongings that no one had cleared. Journals of herbal remedies written in fading ink, jars of dried plants lining shelves, furniture worn smooth by decades of use and love. Binta unpacked her 2 suitcases and began the slow, painful process of learning to survive in complete isolation from everything she'd known. She spent the first week crying until her throat was raw and her eyes were swollen, mourning not just Darren, but the version of herself who'd believed in love and goodness and men who kept their promises. The nursing career she'd worked desperately hard to build abandoned without notice. her family, unreachable because any contact would expose them to Darren's promised destruction, her friends, her colleagues, her entire support system, gone as if they'd never existed, her entire life sacrificed to protect the people she loved and the child she'd chosen over Darren's threats and money. But grief eventually crystallized into something harder, something that would sustain her through the impossible months ahead. Determination, rage transformed into fuel that could power her through isolation, fear channeled into the kind of focus that made survival possible. The pregnancy progressed in isolation that would have broken weaker people. Binta read her grandmother's old medical books by candlelight, teaching herself everything she could about prenatal care and childbirth complications. She found a small clinic in a town an hour away, where a kind doctor asked few questions and accepted cash payments without requiring insurance cards or extensive paperwork. She used her grandmother's maiden name, Okoye, for all paperwork, created a ghost identity to birth a ghost baby who would never appear in any database connected to the Peter family or Darren Warren's investigations. She told the doctor she was escaping an abusive relationship, which was true enough in all the ways that mattered. The doctor didn't press for details beyond what was medically necessary, just provided gentle care and asked her to check in regularly for the baby's health. Meanwhile, in Seattle, Darren Warren married Senator Blake's daughter in a ceremony that made national news and society pages. Binta saw the photos in a newspaper at the clinic. Darren in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, his bride in her designer gown, both smiling for cameras that captured everything except the truth of what their union really was. The caption called it the wedding of the year, a union of political power and pharmaceutical empire that would reshape healthcare policy for generations. Binta burned the newspaper in her grandmother's wood stove, watching the photos curl and blacken, and never looked back at the man she'd once believed she loved. She couldn't afford to think about him, couldn't let herself wonder if he was searching for her or if he'd simply moved on, relieved that his problem had disappeared conveniently. All that mattered was survival, getting through each endless day, keeping herself and her baby healthy, preparing for a future that felt impossible to imagine clearly. Warren Pharmaceuticals went public with record-breaking success. The news reached even Montana's wilderness through radio stations and newspapers in the small towns, stories celebrating the young CEO who'd made billions overnight, who was revolutionizing healthcare, who represented everything bright and innovative about American business and entrepreneurship. Binta listened to the radio reports, while her belly swelled with the secret that would destroy Darren's carefully constructed image if it ever became public. She never considered using that secret as a weapon. Revenge meant exposure, and exposure meant risk to her family, meant Darren might make good on his threats before she could stop him. So she swallowed her anger and focused entirely on survival. The isolation nearly broke her spirit during the darkest winter months. Days passed without human conversation beyond brief exchanges at the clinic or general store. Nights stretched endless and brutally cold, the Montana winter fierce and unforgiving to someone unprepared for its severity. She talked to her unborn child to keep from going mad, whispering promises that they'd survive this together, that someday they'd build something beautiful from these ashes of destruction. Labor came during a spring thunderstorm, the sky splitting open as her body did the same, nature mirroring the violence of birth. Binta drove herself to the clinic through rain that hammered her windshield, gripping the steering wheel through contractions that stole her breath, refusing to let fear override the necessity of getting professional help. The same kind doctor delivered her son at dawn while rain hammered the roof and thunder shook the windows, while the storm raged outside, and Binta's body performed the ancient miracle of bringing life into the world, despite everything that had tried to prevent it. "What name for the birth certificate?" the doctor asked gently, holding the squirming, crying newborn. "Frank Okoye," Binta whispered, holding her son against her chest for the first time, feeling his warmth and reality. Just Frank Okoye. Not Peter, not Warren, a name that connected to neither family, a name that meant this child belonged only to himself and to the mother who'd given up everything to bring him safely into a world that would never know his father had threatened his existence. Frank had Darren's eyes, that same piercing blue that had first captivated Binta at the charity gala, where their doomed relationship had begun. But where Darren's eyes held calculation and cold ambition, Frank's held only innocence and the pure trust of a newborn who knew nothing of threats or cruelty or fathers who wanted him erased. Where Darren had chosen power over love, Frank would learn compassion. Where Darren had demanded control, Frank would understand consent and kindness. Where Darren had threatened destruction, Frank would build and heal. Binta made these promises while her son's first cries echoed through the clinic, while the storm raged outside, while her body ached with the aftermath of bringing life into the world completely alone, without the support that should have been her right. In Seattle, Darren hired private investigators to search for the woman who'd disappeared. Binta learned this months later from a newspaper article about Warren Pharmaceuticals expanding their security division. The story mentioned the CEO's personal interest in surveillance technology, his investment in tracking systems and facial recognition software, his apparent paranoia about corporate espionage and information security. She understood the real reason behind that investment. Darren was looking for her, terrified of the bomb she might carry, the proof of his cruelty that could detonate his perfect life if she ever chose to use it. His investigators found nothing because Binta Peter no longer existed in any database they could access or search. Only Binta Okoye remained, a single mother in Montana's wilderness, living on her grandmother's property with a son who would never know the violence of his conception or the threats that had forced his birth into hiding and isolation. But isolation wasn't survival, not really. Binta knew she couldn't raise Frank in complete withdrawal from the world forever. He needed education, socialization, opportunities beyond Montana wilderness, and she needed income beyond the rapidly dwindling cash she'd brought from Seattle. She began experimenting with her grandmother's recipes, the traditional remedies the old woman had used for everything from headaches to heartbreak. The herbs grew wild on the property. The knowledge lived in journals her grandmother had kept for decades. And Binta had nothing but time to learn, to test, to create something meaningful from the ashes of her destroyed life. She started small, selling remedies at a farmer's market in a nearby town. Natural pain relief, herbal teas for sleep, salves for skin conditions. People loved them. Natural, affordable, genuinely effective. Word spread slowly through small Montana communities. Orders increased gradually. Binta reinvested every dollar, expanding cautiously, always using the Okoye name, always keeping Frank's face away from any photographs or public records. Frank grew strong and curious, a toddler who knew nothing of penthouses or threats, who thought his mother's weathered hands and determined eyes were the most beautiful things in the world. Binta sang to him at night, teaching him strength disguised as lullabies. "We're going to be more than survivors," she whispered to him one night while Montana snow buried the property in winter silence. "We're going to be warriors." And slowly, painfully, impossibly, they were. Chapter 3. The Rise. Forbes magazine arrived at Binta's Portland office on a morning when Oregon rain turned the city's streets into rivers of reflected light, and everything she'd built through years of careful obscurity was about to become dangerously visible to the man she'd spent those years hiding from. Her assistant placed the magazine on her desk with hands that trembled slightly with excitement. "You absolutely need to see this right now. It's incredible. You're on the cover." The cover featured words that would change everything about her carefully constructed safety. The Natural Health Revolution. How one woman is disrupting Big Pharma. Binta's face stared back at her from glossy paper, the professional photographer having captured something fierce and uncompromising in her expression, something that spoke of battles fought in silence and won against impossible odds. Inside, the article detailed her journey in carefully edited terms she'd meticulously approved before publication. Single mother builds empire from grandmother's traditional recipes. natural remedies company reaches $100 million valuation. Industry analysts predict continued explosive growth trajectory. The story painted her as an inspirational figure, a bootstrap success story, the American dream personified in a black woman who'd overcome impossible odds through determination and vision. What the article didn't mention, what the Forbes writer would never know, was the man she'd fled, the threats that had driven her into years of hiding, the terror of rebuilding herself from absolutely nothing while constantly looking over her shoulder. Those secrets stayed locked behind her professional smile in the photographs, buried beneath the triumphant narrative that magazines loved to tell. "This is absolutely incredible," her assistant breathed, reading over Binta's shoulder with barely contained excitement. "You're going to be everywhere now. Every major media outlet will want exclusive interviews. Your products will be in demand beyond anything we've seen. This changes everything for the company." Binta touched the magazine cover with fingers that wanted to tremble, but she wouldn't allow it, feeling the weight of exposure settling on her shoulders like a physical burden. Visibility meant vulnerability. Being everywhere meant being findable. The protection of carefully maintained obscurity was dissolving with every copy of Forbes hitting newsstands across the country, every digital share spreading her face and name and story. "Schedule an emergency meeting with our legal team for this afternoon," Binta said quietly, her voice betraying none of the fear churning relentlessly in her stomach. "I need to discuss enhanced privacy protection protocols immediately, increased security measures for the office and my home, comprehensive background checks on anyone requesting meetings with me, updated NDAs for all employees." Her assistant's excitement dimmed slightly, confusion crossing her face. "Are you worried about something specific? Some kind of threat we should know about?" "Just being appropriately cautious. Success brings attention from all kinds of people, and not all attention is welcome or safe." Because she knew with the absolute certainty of someone who'd spent years preparing for this possibility, that Darren would see this article, would recognize her despite the different surname, despite the dramatic transformation from frightened nursing assistant to confident CEO, would understand that she'd survived his threats, thrived despite his cruelty, become something powerful that he'd never anticipated when he'd tried to force her into compliance through terror. And he would come for her, driven by paranoia or guilt, or some twisted combination of both. In Seattle, Darren Warren sat in his corner office overlooking Puget Sound, his marriage falling apart in slow motion in the penthouse apartment he rarely visited anymore, when Forbes magazine landed on his desk and destroyed what remained of his carefully maintained equilibrium. His wife slept in the mansion's east wing, he in the west, an entire property worth of space between them, and still not enough distance to make their hollow arrangement bearable. Senator Blake's daughter had married him for political connections and family advancement. He'd married her for political cover and social legitimacy. They maintained the facade for cameras and galas and fundraisers, then returned to their separate lives, separate beds, barely speaking except when absolutely necessary for appearances. No love, no warmth, no intimacy of any kind. Just a contractual arrangement that benefited both families while slowly suffocating everyone trapped inside it. Warren Pharmaceuticals faced its first major crisis that threatened the company's foundation. A drug they'd rushed to market to beat competitors was causing severe neurological side effects, tremors, organ damage, symptoms that were systematically destroying the lives of patients who'd trusted their brand. Lawsuits were piling up faster than legal teams could process them. The board was panicking about liability exposure, stock prices were dropping steadily, and Darren couldn't seem to focus on any of the crisis management because his nights were haunted by a woman he'd threatened and a child who might exist somewhere in the world, living proof of his cruelty if anyone ever discovered the truth. He'd hired investigators immediately after Binta disappeared, spent hundreds of thousands tracking down every possible lead. They'd found nothing. Binta Peter had vanished more completely than anyone he'd ever encountered, as if she'd simply dissolved into air without leaving any trace. No credit card usage patterns to follow, no employment records to track, no hospital admissions or pharmacy records, no death certificate, absolutely nothing. The investigators had eventually suggested she might have left the country entirely, changed her identity through illegal channels, possibly even died somewhere remote without official documentation. Darren had wanted desperately to believe she'd taken his money after all, handled the situation quietly and discreetly, was living somewhere under a new name, having moved on completely from their brief relationship. Until Forbes magazine landed on his desk that morning and destroyed every comforting lie he'd told himself. Darren stared at the cover for a long time, his coffee going cold in the expensive mug beside him. The name was different, Binta Okoye instead of Binta Peter, but her face was absolutely unmistakable, even with years of change between the frightened woman in his penthouse and this powerful CEO staring confidently from the magazine cover. Older, yes. Transformed, certainly. Harder, stronger, radiating the kind of power and confidence she'd never possessed when he knew her. But those eyes held the same strength he'd tried to break through threats, the same defiance he'd tried to crush through terror. This was Binta. This was the woman whose life he'd tried to control and whose spirit he'd completely underestimated. She'd survived. More than survived. She'd built an empire from literally nothing while he'd inherited his family's company and was watching it crumble under the weight of shortcuts and compromises that had seemed justified in pursuit of profit and market dominance. The article mentioned her son with calculated vagueness, single mother to Frank, who inspires her mission to make healthcare affordable for families like hers. No details about the boy's age or appearance. No photos that might reveal family resemblance. Nothing concrete that would confirm what Darren desperately needed to know. But Binta had disappeared 5 years ago. The timeline suggested possibilities that made his hands shake as he held the magazine with white knuckles. He forced himself to stop calculating, stop trying to determine Frank's age from the limited information. Numbers and timelines wouldn't give him truth. Only direct confrontation would. His secretary appeared in the doorway, politely waiting for acknowledgement. "Sir, your wife is calling again about the charity gala tonight. She wants to confirm your attendance and coordinate arrival times." "Cancel everything on my calendar," Darren said, still staring at Binta's photograph like it held answers he desperately needed. "Clear my entire schedule for the next week. Find out everything you can about Binta Okoye, where she lives, where her company is headquartered, where she'll be appearing publicly in the next month. I need a complete comprehensive profile by end of business today." "Sir, we have the emergency board meeting this afternoon about the lawsuit settlement strategies." "I said cancel everything." His voice came out sharper than he'd intended, years of suppressed emotion and guilt bleeding into his tone. "This is more important than anything else on my schedule. Do you understand?" The secretary left quickly and Darren studied the Forbes article with the obsessive intensity he usually reserved for merger documents and acquisition strategies. Every detail mattered. Every word revealed something about the woman Binta had become and the life she'd built from the ruins of what he'd destroyed. She'd used her grandmother's maiden name, which explained perfectly why his expensive investigators had never found any trace of her. She'd built her business initially in Montana, far from Seattle's reach and his family's sphere of influence. She'd been strategic, careful, deliberately methodical in her disappearance and reconstruction. This wasn't luck or fortunate coincidence. This was calculated survival by someone who'd understood exactly how dangerous Darren could be and had planned accordingly. Respect warred with regret, warred with something darker that might have been obsession taking root. Darren had spent years trying desperately to forget Binta, to bury the memory of her terrified face when he'd made his threats. He'd told himself comforting lies, that she'd taken his money, handled the situation discreetly, moved on with her life. The alternative reality, that she'd actually kept the pregnancy despite his threats, was too terrifying to acknowledge because it meant a child existed somewhere in the world, living proof of his cruelty if anyone ever discovered the connection. Now that potential evidence might have a name. Frank, a son he'd never met, never held, never acknowledged as his responsibility. The board meeting Darren was supposed to chair continued without him. His wife's charity gala happened without him. his conspicuous absence noted and gossiped about by Seattle society. He sat alone in his office as night fell over Seattle, obsessively researching everything available about roots and remedies, about Binta's meteoric rise, about the woman who'd rebuilt herself from the ashes of his destruction and emerged more powerful than he'd ever imagined possible for someone he'd dismissed as insignificant. A conference notification crossed his email the next morning. Pacific Northwest Healthcare Innovation Summit, Portland, Oregon, next month. Keynote speaker, Binta Okoye, founder of Roots and Remedies, discussing natural healthcare alternatives and pharmaceutical industry reform. Darren registered for the conference immediately, cancelling 3 other important commitments to clear his schedule completely. His assistant questioned the decision, pointing out that Warren Pharmaceuticals' contentious relationship with natural health companies made his attendance seem like terrible optics, especially given their current legal troubles and public image crisis. "I'm going," Darren said with absolute finality. "That's not negotiable. Make whatever arrangements are necessary." In Portland, Binta received the conference speaker invitation with profoundly mixed feelings. Public speaking meant exposure, vulnerability, putting herself on a literal stage where anyone could see her. But her company's mission required advocacy and visibility. She'd spent too long building Roots and Remedies to hide now. Too many people depended on her products to let fear silence her voice. Frank, now attending kindergarten at a progressive school, was thriving in ways that made Binta's heart ache with fierce pride. Bright, endlessly curious, gentle with other children, asking questions about everything. "Mama, what does your company actually do?" Frank asked one evening while she prepared dinner. "We help people feel better without making them poor. We create medicines from plants and natural things so families don't have to choose between being healthy and eating food." "That's really good," Frank said seriously. "Some kids at school say their parents can't afford to go to the doctor when they're sick. That's exactly why Mama's work matters so much, baby." Frank hesitated, then asked the question that always broke her heart. "Do other kids have daddies who come to school events?" "Some do, some don't. Families are all different, and different doesn't mean wrong or incomplete." "But why don't I have one?" Binta knelt to meet his eyes. "Because the person who would be your father wasn't ready to be a parent when you were born. He wasn't strong enough or brave enough, but that's okay, because I'm strong enough for both of us." "You're the strongest person I know," Frank said, hugging her tight. The conference approached. Binta prepared meticulously, crafting arguments that would challenge industry practices without alienating potential allies. She had no idea that in the audience, Darren Warren would be watching every word. The collision was inevitable, and neither of them was prepared. Chapter 4. The Collision. The Portland Convention Center buzzed with hundreds of healthcare professionals gathered for what industry magazines were calling the year's most important conference, a direct challenge to pharmaceutical practices from voices they could no longer ignore or dismiss. Binta stood backstage reviewing her notes for the 10th time, trying to calm nerves that always preceded public speaking. Her presentation loaded on the main screen. The Natural Health Revolution, Democratizing Healthcare for the 21st Century. 5 minutes, Ms. Okoye, a stagehand called. She took a deep breath, smoothed her navy suit, and reminded herself why this mattered beyond personal fears. This was about millions who couldn't afford healthcare, who deserved better than exploitation. The auditorium held over 1,000 people when she walked onto the stage. Blinding lights made it impossible to see individual faces beyond the first few rows. Binta preferred it that way. Crowds were easier to address when they remained abstract rather than individual judgments. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady despite racing heart. "My name is Binta Okoye, and I'm here to challenge everything you think you know about healthcare in America." In the back row, Darren Warren sat rigid, his entire world narrowing to the woman on stage. He'd thought he was prepared for seeing her. He was wrong. Binta looked completely transformed, not just older or more polished, but fundamentally different. The frightened woman from his penthouse had become something fierce and unbreakable. She commanded the stage with authority that came from surviving the impossible. We've created a system where people die rationing insulin because pharmaceutical companies prioritize profit over lives. Binta's voice rang through the space. We've normalized families declaring bankruptcy for cancer treatment. We've accepted healthcare as privilege rather than right. The audience was captivated. Darren watched heads nodding, people leaning forward, energy shifting as Binta built her devastating argument with precision and irrefutable data. Natural alternatives aren't about rejecting modern medicine, they're about expanding access. When turmeric capsules cost $15 instead of $1,500 for prescription anti-inflammatories with identical compounds, we're not being primitive, we're being compassionate. Each word felt like personal indictment. Warren Pharmaceuticals was exactly what she criticized: rushing drugs to market, maximizing profits, treating patients as revenue streams rather than human beings worthy of dignity. But the pharmaceutical industry doesn't want you to have affordable alternatives. Binta's voice hardened. They've spent billions convincing you that natural remedies are snake oil, that you need their patented formulations to survive. They've lobbied to restrict holistic healthcare access, maintaining their healing monopoly. The presentation continued, each slide supporting arguments with peer-reviewed research. Binta was brilliant. She'd built expertise that challenged an entire industry with evidence they couldn't easily dismiss. Then, during a pause between slides, her eyes swept the auditorium and locked directly with Darren's. The world stopped. Even with distance and lights between them, Binta recognized him instantly. Those eyes, that posture, the coiled tension. Her heart slammed against her ribs, and she lost her place in the speech. The silence stretched 3 eternal seconds. The audience murmured, wondering if their speaker was experiencing technical difficulties. Binta forced herself to look away, to find her place with suddenly trembling hands, to continue speaking as if her past hadn't just materialized like a demanding ghost. The future of healthcare, her voice trembled before she controlled it, depends on rejecting false choices. We need integration, not opposition. But she couldn't focus anymore, couldn't remember which points she'd planned to emphasize, couldn't deliver the powerful conclusion she'd rehearsed endlessly. Darren's presence infected everything, turned her presentation into a minefield where every word might detonate something uncontrollable. She rushed through remaining slides, delivery becoming mechanical, finishing 5 minutes early. The applause was enthusiastic but confused. People sensed something had shifted, that the electric beginning had faded into something hollow. Binta fled before the moderator could introduce Q&A, muttering about medical emergencies. Backstage, she leaned against a wall in a quiet corridor, trying to control her breathing, stop her hands from shaking. He was here. After all these years, Darren had found her. "Ms. Okoye, are you all right?" A coordinator approached with concern. "You seemed unwell." "I'm fine. Just need water and a moment." "Several people want to speak with you, including hospital systems and insurance companies. Schedule them for tomorrow, all of them. I need to leave immediately." Binta grabbed her bag and headed for the exit, walking fast but not running, refusing to show panic. She could feel eyes on her, conference attendees wanting to network, their hands reaching out, voices calling her name. She ignored everything, focused only on reaching her car before the inevitable confrontation. She'd almost made it. Her hand was on the main door, autumn air rushing in, freedom steps away. "Binta!" His voice stopped her at the threshold between inside and outside, past and present, the life she'd built and the man who'd tried to destroy it. Her hand rested on the handle. For a long moment she considered pushing through, pretending she hadn't heard, leaving Darren standing in the lobby without acknowledgement. But running would give him power she refused to surrender. Running would make her the frightened woman from his penthouse again, and she'd worked too hard to become someone else entirely. So Binta turned slowly, keeping her face carefully neutral despite the storm beneath, and faced the man who'd tried to destroy her. Darren stood 10 feet away, looking haggard despite his expensive suit. His eyes held something that might have been desperation or regret, but Binta had learned not to trust emotions Darren performed. Don't. The word came out harder than intended. Don't say my name like you have any right. Don't act like we have any connection giving you permission to approach me. I need to talk to you. Darren stepped closer and Binta's training kicked in. She mapped exits, calculated distance to her car, measured space between them, prepared to scream if necessary. No. Binta's voice cut through the lobby noise. You need to stay away from me. You need to forget you saw me today. You need to return to your life and leave me alone. People were starting to notice, phones angling their way, whispered conversations spreading. A security guard drifted closer, sensing trouble from the tension radiating off both of them. Darren glanced around, realizing they were creating a scene. Please, 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes to... To what? Apologize? Explain? Binta's laugh was bitter. You think 5 minutes could possibly matter after what you did? I know what I did was unforgivable. I know I can never... You threatened my mother's life, Darren. My mother's life. Binta's voice rose, despite efforts to control it. You threatened to destroy my brother's future, my father's business, everything my family built. You tried to force me to... She stopped herself, too aware of the recording phones. You don't get to ask me for anything, not now, not ever. The child. Darren's voice broke. Is there a child? Is Frank real? Binta's blood turned to ice. The fact that he knew her son's name felt like violation. How do you know that name? The Forbes article mentioned. That's none of your business. My son is none of your business. If I have a son, I have a right to... You have no rights! The words exploded from her, loud enough to make everyone in the lobby turn and stare openly. You gave up every right when you made your threats. You think biology creates obligations after you terrorized a pregnant woman into hiding. Darren's face crumpled, but Binta felt no satisfaction. She felt nothing but urgent need to get away before she said something that couldn't be unsaid. Stay away from me, Darren. Stay away from my company. If I see you again, if you try to contact me in any way, I will file a restraining order and make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man you really are. She pushed through the doors into Portland rain, leaving Darren standing in the lobby looking shattered, leaving behind confused conference attendees who'd witnessed intensity they couldn't understand. Her hands shook so badly she could barely get her keys out, her whole body trembling with adrenaline and old terror. The drive home was a blur she couldn't remember later. She couldn't recall traffic lights or turns, could only replay that moment when their eyes met across the auditorium, the way 5 years of distance had collapsed instantly. Frank was at kindergarten. Her house was empty when she arrived. Binta locked every door, closed every curtain, checked every window, and finally let herself fall apart on her kitchen floor. She sobbed with rage and fear she'd held together during confrontation, with terror that had never really left, with crushing weight of realizing that no matter how far she ran or how much she achieved, Darren could still find her. He'd found her. Despite everything, Darren had found her, and now she had to figure out how to protect Frank from the father who'd tried to erase him. Chapter 5. Desperation. The flowers arrived at Roots and Remedies headquarters 3 days after the conference, an ostentatious arrangement of white roses and lilies that filled the reception area with cloying fragrance reminiscent of funeral homes and false apologies. These just came for you, Binta's assistant said, carrying the attached card with visible distaste. Want me to toss them? Binta opened the card with shaking hands. I'm sorry, please let me explain. We need to talk about Frank. D.W. Toss them, she said flatly. And if any more deliveries come from Darren Warren or anyone claiming to represent him, refuse them at the door. Nothing gets through. The flowers were just the beginning. Letters arrived daily, each returned unopened with refused, stamped in aggressive red letters. Emails flooded her business account until IT created filters automatically deleting anything from Darren's addresses. A courier delivered a handwritten note on Warren Pharmaceuticals' letterhead directly to her home. She had no idea how he'd gotten that address, and the violation made her upgrade security immediately. The note said, I need to know the truth about Frank. I'm begging you. please." Binta burned the note in her office fireplace and instructed her legal team to prepare comprehensive harassment documentation for a potential restraining order. Then Darren tried the business angle, shifting from personal appeals to professional pressure. A formal partnership proposal arrived from Warren Pharmaceuticals' legal department, offering to invest $50 million in Roots and Remedies in exchange for minority stake and distribution access. The offer was financially generous beyond anything she'd seen, strategically advantageous in ways her CFO immediately recognized. "This is an incredible opportunity," Binta's CFO said during the emergency meeting she'd called. "We could expand into international markets we've only dreamed about. The distribution network alone would transform our reach." "We're rejecting it," Binta said firmly, "but the terms are extraordinarily favorable. They're essentially giving us money and infrastructure with minimal control demands. I don't care about the business perspective in this case. Warren Pharmaceuticals represents everything our company stands against. Accepting their money would compromise our entire mission and undermine everything we've built. With all respect, personal feelings shouldn't override sound financial strategy. This isn't about personal feelings. This is about maintaining integrity and independence. Draft a polite rejection stating, 'We're not interested in partnerships with Warren Pharmaceuticals.' Make it clear this decision is final." The rejection went out that afternoon. 2 days later, another proposal arrived, this time directly from Darren's private office. Even more generous terms, even more desperation visible between professional language. Binta didn't bother with politeness this time. Her assistant sent back one sentence, "No amount of money will make me work with you. Stop trying." Darren's next move was more aggressive. Warren Pharmaceuticals began approaching Roots and Remedies' key suppliers with acquisition offers and exclusive contracts. If he couldn't partner with Binta directly, he'd try to control her supply chain, force her to the negotiating table through dependencies. But her suppliers, many of whom respected her mission deeply, rejected the overtures immediately and informed Binta of the attempted interference. "He's trying to corner our suppliers," her operations head reported grimly. "Classic supply chain warfare. He wants to make us dependent on sources he controls." "Diversify our sources immediately," Binta ordered. "I want backup suppliers for every ingredient. Make sure we are never dependent on any source he could potentially control." The maneuvering continued for weeks. Darren tried everything short of direct confrontation, increasingly desperate business proposals, supply chain pressure her team systematically neutralized, even attempting to hire away key employees with salary offers, triple what she could pay. None of it worked. Binta had built her company on loyalty and mission rather than just money, and her team stood firm. Finally, when every indirect approach had failed, Darren appeared in person. Binta was leaving her office late one evening, reviewing reports on her phone as she walked toward her car. She looked up and froze. Darren was waiting near her vehicle, leaning against his own car like he had every right to be there. Her security team moved forward, but Binta held up a hand to stop them, refusing to show fear, even though her heart pounded. "How did you get past building security?" she demanded. "I told them I was an investor considering acquisition opportunities." Darren straightened, and Binta could see exhaustion carved into his face. "Please, just talk to me. 5 minutes." "You're trespassing. Leave now or I'm calling the police." "I'll leave, I promise. But first," he pulled out his phone with shaking hands. "First, you need to know what's happening. My company is drowning. The drug recall litigation is bankrupting us. My marriage is over. Divorce proceedings started last month. My reputation is ruined. The board is forcing me out." "None of that is my problem." Binta started walking toward her car, but Darren moved to block her path. "I don't care about any of it." His voice cracked. "The company, the money, the reputation, none of it matters as much as knowing whether I have a son. Whether Frank is mine. Whether you actually kept the pregnancy despite my threats." "Yes," Binta said coldly, deciding honesty might end this harassment faster. "I have a son named Frank. And no, He's not yours. Biology doesn't make you a father. It makes you a sperm donor. The man who threatened to kill my mother doesn't get to claim father status." The words hit Darren like physical blows. He actually staggered, one hand bracing against his car. "Can I meet him? Just once, just to see—" "Absolutely not." Binta's voice was ice. "You think I'd let you anywhere near my child? After you threatened his grandmother's life, after you tried to force me to abort him, you think I'd expose him to that toxicity?" I was wrong. I was terrified and stupid and cruel, but people change. I've changed. I want to— "You want?" Binta stepped closer, fury breaking free. "That's always been your problem. You want things, so you believe you deserve them. You wanted a perfect public image, so you threatened an innocent woman. You want redemption now, so you think showing up and looking pathetic earns you anything. You want to meet your son, so you think you have rights to a child you tried to force out of existence. I know I don't deserve anything. You're right. You don't deserve my forgiveness, my time, my consideration, or a single moment with Frank. He's mine. I raised him alone while you became a billionaire. I fed him and loved him and protected him when you would have preferred he didn't exist. And now that your life is falling apart, you think you can insert yourself into our lives because you suddenly feel regret." Darren was crying openly now, tears streaming down his face. "I'm begging you. Let me meet him once. Let me apologize. Let me try to—" "No." Binta pulled out her phone. "I'm calling security now. If you're not gone in 30 seconds, I'm having you arrested." "Binta, 25 seconds. Please, 20 seconds. Darren finally broke, turning away and stumbling toward his car. He drove away slowly, and Binta watched until she couldn't see him before allowing herself to collapse against her vehicle, shaking with adrenaline. That night, she held Frank extra tight during bedtime stories, breathing in his smell, trying to calm her racing heart. He was safe. Darren didn't know which school Frank attended, didn't have unfettered access to their home, couldn't reach them without going through security layers she'd constructed. But the walls felt thinner now, the distance less absolute. Whatever it took to keep her son safe from the man who'd already caused them both so much damage, she would do without hesitation. Chapter 6. The Public Confession. Warren Pharmaceuticals stock dropped 15% in pre-market trading. The morning CNN announced their exclusive primetime interview with CEO Darren Warren regarding personal misconduct allegations and corporate ethics concerns that will reshape the pharmaceutical industry conversation. The interview aired at prime time. Millions watched as Darren sat across from an investigative journalist in what would become one of the most brutal public confessions in corporate history. "Mr. Warren, you requested this interview to address allegations. Let's start with the most serious claim, that you threatened a woman's family to coerce her into terminating a pregnancy. Is that true?" Darren's face was haggard, his polish completely absent. "Yes. It's completely true, and it's the worst thing I've ever done in my life." "Can you explain the circumstances?" 5 years ago, I was engaged to Senator Blake's daughter. Our company was preparing to go public. A woman I'd been involved with, a nursing assistant named Binta Peter, told me she was pregnant. Darren's voice cracked. Instead of taking responsibility, I threatened her. I told her if she had the baby, I would destroy her entire family. "Specifically, how did you threaten her family?" "Her mother received dialysis at a hospital my family owned. I threatened to have her removed from care. Her brother had a scholarship to our university. I threatened to revoke it. Her father's company had contracts with us. I threatened to terminate them and blacklist him." Darren was crying now on national television. "I told this terrified young woman I would systematically destroy everyone she loved if she didn't abort our child." "And did she comply?" "No. She vanished completely. I hired investigators to find her, not because I'd changed my mind, but because I was paranoid she'd expose me. She disappeared so thoroughly I convinced myself she'd handled it quietly. I was wrong." "You've recently discovered otherwise?" "Yes. The woman I threatened rebuilt her life from nothing. She became Binta Okoye, founder of Roots and Remedies, now worth hundreds of millions. She raised our son alone, without any support from me, while I became a billionaire and pretended none of it happened. The interview continued for an hour. Darren held nothing back, detailing his cruelty, his cowardice, his recent harassment attempts. He exposed himself completely, offering no excuses. Why confess now? Because I want Binta to know I understand what I did, because the public deserves to know what kind of man I am, because my son deserves to know his father is trying to take responsibility, even though it's far too late. Have you had contact with your son? No. Binta rightfully won't allow me near him. I don't blame her. I wouldn't trust me either. What do you hope to gain? Nothing. Darren looked at the camera. I hope to gain absolutely nothing. This isn't about redemption. This is about truth. About admitting I'm the villain, not the victim. The interview ended with Darren reading a statement. To Binta, I cannot undo what I did. I cannot give you back the years you struggled alone. I can only acknowledge the truth and accept consequences. I'm sorry. Those words are inadequate, but they're all I have. Within hours, the interview went viral. Warren Pharmaceuticals' board called emergency meetings. Remaining investors liquidated positions. The company barely surviving the drug scandal was now in complete free fall. In Portland, Binta watched while Frank slept upstairs and felt nothing except cold rage. He thought confession was courageous. This wasn't bravery. It was manipulation, trying to force her hand by making their tragedy public, putting his guilt at the center of her survival story. Her phone exploded with notifications, reporters demanding comment, investors discussing publicity, family members who'd made connections. She ignored everyone except her crisis publicist. I need a statement immediately. The statement went out the next morning. I have no interest in Mr. Warren's redemption tour. His confession centers his guilt rather than the survival of those he harmed. My focus remains my son and my company. This is private, and I request all media respect that. I will not grant interviews or participate in the narrative Mr. Warren has created. But the circus couldn't be controlled. Paparazzi appeared outside headquarters. Reporters harassed her suppliers and employees. Frank's school increased security and sent letters to parents. "Mommy, why are there cameras outside?" Frank asked when they couldn't leave through the front door. "Just silly grown-up stuff," Binta said, guiding him out the back entrance. "Nothing to worry about." But Frank was smart. He'd noticed his mother seemed stressed, that routines had changed, that security accompanied them everywhere, that whispered conversations stopped when he entered rooms. Something was wrong. Public opinion split sharply. Some praised Darren's confession as accountability. Others saw through it, pointing out that his bravery was really centering himself in Binta's story, making his guilt more important than her survival. "He's trying to force her to forgive him publicly," one viral post read. "He's making his redemption her responsibility. It's manipulative as hell." Binta appreciated those voices but stayed silent. Engaging would prolong the circus. She focused on maintaining normalcy for Frank, protecting him from chaos his father had created. 2 weeks later, a delivery arrived. Not flowers, a legal document. Darren had voluntarily terminated all parental rights to Frank, irrevocably. No conditions. A letter accompanied it. "I have no right to be his father. This ensures I can never use law to force contact. You and Frank are free." Binta read it 3 times, checking for catches. There were none. Darren had done the one thing she never expected, given up legal claim to the son he'd been desperate to meet. She should have felt relief, victory. Instead, she felt empty, like the end of a war that cost too much to ever feel like winning. That night, Frank asked, "Is the man on TV who's been talking about you? Is that my father?" Binta knelt to meet his eyes, choosing honesty. "Yes, baby. That's the person who would be your biological father." "Why doesn't he live with us?" "Because before you were born, he said things that hurt me very badly. So I decided we were better off just us two." Frank hugged her. "That's okay. I only need you anyway." Binta held her son and wished the story could end there. But she had a terrible feeling the confession wasn't an ending, but an opening move whose consequences she couldn't yet predict. Chapter 7. Frank's Discovery. Frank was learning to read at a level that delighted and concerned his kindergarten teacher. The child devoured books like they contained answers to questions he didn't yet know how to ask. Which was how he found the tablet his mother had left on her office desk during a weekend visit to headquarters, briefly unlocked while she took an urgent call. "Mama, I'm bored," Frank announced, wandering into Binta's office where she paced with her phone. "Take a book from the waiting room, baby," Binta said, covering the phone. "I'll be done in 20 minutes. But Frank spotted the tablet settling into the corner chair before his mother noticed. He swiped through screens with practiced ease, games, email, boring adult stuff. Then a news article caught his attention because it had his mother's photo, and another photo, a man with eyes the same color as his. Frank tapped the article. The man was in lots of pictures. In one, he was crying. Then Frank saw a video. He tapped it, and the man's face filled the screen. 5 years ago, the man's voice was shaky. "I threatened a woman named Binta Peter." Frank knew that name. Peter, Mama's old name. He turned up the volume slightly. "She was pregnant with my child, a son named Frank." That was his name. "And instead of being supportive, I told her terrible things. I said I would hurt her family. I would make sure her mother couldn't get medicine. I would take away her brother's school money. I would destroy her father's job." Frank's eyes went wide. Destroy? Hurt Grandma? "I was wrong. I was so wrong." The man kept crying. "She ran away to protect Frank, to protect their baby from my threats." Frank's hands trembled. This was about him, about Mama, about why he didn't have a daddy. "I don't deserve to know, my son, but if Frank ever sees this, I want him to know, your mother is a hero. She protected you when I would have hurt you." The video ended. Frank sat frozen, tears running down his cheeks, his 5-year-old mind overwhelmed. This man was his father. His father had wanted to hurt Grandma. His father had made Mama so scared she ran away. "Baby, what are you watching?" Binta's voice made Frank jump. She saw the screen, her face going white. "Oh no, Frank, I should have—" "Mama!" Frank's voice came out tiny and scared. "That man said bad things about Grandma." Binta knelt beside him, gently taking the tablet, her own eyes filling with tears. "Yes, baby. He said things that were very scary to me, but he didn't actually hurt anyone. We went away before that could happen." "But he wanted to." Frank's lip trembled. "He wanted to hurt Grandma. He threatened to hurt them, yes, but I protected everyone by leaving. Nobody got hurt. You're safe, baby." Frank threw his arms around her neck, crying harder. "I don't want a daddy who was mean to you." "Oh, baby." Binta held him tight, rocking slightly. I know. He was crying. Why was he crying?" "Because he's very sorry now for what he did, because he understands he made terrible mistakes." Frank pulled back to look at her. "Do you forgive him?" "No, baby, I don't. What he did was too hurtful for me to forgive." "Good." Frank nodded with child logic. "He shouldn't have been mean to you." "Mama?" Frank's voice was very small. "What if I wanted to see what he looks like? Not because I want a daddy, just because I'm curious?" Binta felt her world tilting. "I don't know, baby. That's a very big decision." "I'm scared of him," Frank whispered, "but I also want to see." "Is that weird?" "That's not weird at all. That's actually very brave, being cautious but still curious." "Can I think about it?" "Yes, we both can, and we can talk to someone who helps kids understand big feelings." "Okay." Frank hugged her again. "I love you, Mama. I love you bigger than the whole universe, baby." That night, after Frank finally slept, Binta sat in her office wrestling with impossible decisions. Frank had seen the video, had been frightened but was expressing natural curiosity, was asking if maybe he could meet Darren sometime. She had to decide whether protecting Frank meant keeping him away forever or letting him satisfy his curiosity in a controlled way, so the mystery didn't grow larger than reality. She pulled up her email and typed to Darren's address. Frank saw your interview. It frightened him. He knows you threatened me and his grandparents. He's scared of you, but he's also curious because children are curious about origins. Against every instinct, I'm considering one supervised meeting in a public place. Reply only if you accept these terms. You get 1 hour. You will not touch him without his permission. You will answer his questions honestly. You will not ask me for anything. This is about Frank's health, not your redemption. If you traumatize my son, you'll never see him again. She hit send before she could delete it. Darren's response came within minutes. I understand every term. I accept everything. Thank you. I don't deserve this. Binta buried her face in her hands, wondering if she'd just made the worst mistake of her life. Tomorrow she'd call the therapist. She'd consult her lawyer. She'd create a safety plan. She'd prepare for the possibility that this would go wrong. But tonight, she just watched Frank sleep and whispered, I'm trying to do right by you, even when I don't know what right looks like. Chapter 8. The breaking Washington Park was brilliant with autumn colors when Binta arrived early, her security team discreetly positioned where children's laughter provided soundtrack to what would either be healing or disaster. Frank held her hand so tightly his knuckles were white, his face serious in a way no 5-year-olds should be. He'd asked 4 times that morning if they could cancel. Remember what we talked about, Binta said, kneeling to meet his eyes. You don't have to hug him or even like him. You can just look and ask questions, and if you want to leave at any moment, we leave immediately, okay? Okay, Mama. Frank's voice was tiny. You're being incredibly brave. Real bravery isn't about not being scared. It's about being scared and doing the hard thing anyway. They sat on a bench, and Binta tried to control her racing heart. She'd barely slept, running through every scenario. Her therapist had walked her through grounding techniques. Her lawyer had reviewed the terms. Every precaution was in place except protecting Frank's heart. Darren arrived exactly on time, walking across grass like a man approaching something infinitely precious and fragile. He wore jeans and a simple sweater. Even from a distance, Binta could see he was shaking. Frank pressed closer to Binta as Darren approached, his curiosity replaced by visceral fear. Darren stopped 15 feet away, kneeling in the grass, making himself lower than Frank's seated position. His eyes locked on Frank with raw emotion, love, grief, awe, regret, all warring on his face. Hello, Frank. Darren's voice was gentle, almost a whisper. I'm Darren. I'm the person who would have been your father if I'd been brave enough to deserve that role. Frank said nothing, just stared with wide blue eyes that mirrored Darren's exactly. You watched my video, Darren continued, tears already forming. You heard me say some really scary things. I bet that was frightening. Frank nodded slightly. I'm glad you know the truth. Your mama is the bravest person I've ever known, and I was very cruel to her before you were born. I said things that terrified her. You, Frank's voice came out impossibly tiny. You wanted to hurt my grandma? The question landed like a physical blow. Darren's face crumpled, tears streaming. I threatened to. I'm so ashamed of that. Your grandma is wonderful, and I used her illness to try to control your mother. That was evil. Frank seemed to process this. Why would you do something evil? Because I was a coward who only thought about myself. Because I cared more about my job than about doing what was right. Are you still mean now? I try very hard not to be, but trying doesn't undo what I did. They were having this careful conversation when something in Darren broke. Seeing Frank in person, the reality was destroying whatever control he'd built. His body started shaking harder, tears flowing faster, breath coming in gasps. I'm so sorry, Darren sobbed. I'm sorry you saw that video. I'm sorry I wasn't there when you were born. I'm sorry I put your mother through hell. Then Darren started moving forward on his knees, crawling across grass toward the bench, not threateningly, but desperately. "Stop!" Binta's voice cut through sharply. "Darren, stop! You're frightening him!" But Darren was beyond hearing. 5 years of guilt were erupting. He kept crawling, reaching Binta's feet, his forehead nearly touching the ground. "Please," he sobbed incoherently, "please forgive me. I'll do anything." "Mama!" Frank's voice was high with fear, watching this grown man fall apart. Other park visitors stopped to stare, pulling out phones. Binta felt horror and anger, warring with something more complicated. This wasn't the controlled meeting she'd arranged. This was Darren's trauma spilling everywhere. But looking at him, genuinely shattered, sobbing so hard he could barely breathe, she felt something she hadn't expected. Not forgiveness, but recognition that this wasn't performance. This was a man finally breaking under what he'd done. "Frank, look at Mama." Binta turned her son's face away. "Sometimes grown-ups have very big feelings they don't know how to handle. That's what's happening. This isn't about you." "Is he okay?" Frank whispered, frightened but also concerned. "He'll be okay eventually. Right now he's having feelings too big for him to carry well." Binta handed Frank to her security guard with quiet instructions, then walked to where Darren was still on the ground. She didn't touch him, just stood looking down. "Stand up," she said quietly but firmly. "You need to stand up now." Darren looked up, with a face ravaged by grief. "I can't. Seeing him, it makes everything real in a way that's destroying me." "That's your burden to carry," Binta said, something almost kind beneath the firmness. "Not his, not mine, yours. You need to carry it like an adult." Something in her words reached through. Darren slowly pushed himself up, wiping his face with shaking hands. "Can I still talk to him? I'll be better." Binta glanced at Frank, who gave a tiny, uncertain nod. "You can try. But if you fall apart like that again, this meeting ends permanently." "I understand." Darren approached carefully this time, composure held together by pure will. They sat on a bench, Darren on one end, Frank in the middle, Binta on the other, like a guardian angel. "I'm sorry you saw me lose control, Frank," Darren said, his voice still shaky but functional. "Sometimes I get overwhelmed by sad feelings. That wasn't fair for you to see. That's my problem, not yours." Frank studied him. "Do you want to be my daddy now?" The question was so innocent, so cutting, that it physically hurt Darren to hear. "I want to be someone you can know if you want to know me. But your mama is right. I gave up the chance to be your daddy when I was cruel to her. That belongs to her. She's everything important." "Mama says you're sorry." "I am. More sorry than I can express." "Okay." Frank seemed to accept this. "Can I ask you questions?" "Anything you want." They talked for the hour, Frank asking simple questions about where Darren lived, what his job was, why his eyes were blue like Frank's. Darren answered carefully, keeping emotions controlled through visible effort. After an hour, Frank's questions ran out. "Can we go home now, Mama?" "Of course, baby." As they left, Frank walked over to Darren and said quietly, "Seriously, I'm glad you're not mean anymore, but Mama's right. You're not my daddy. You're just Darren, a person I know about now." The words were delivered without cruelty, just honest assessment. Darren nodded, fresh tears flowing, but composure holding. "That's fair. Thank you for meeting me, Frank." Frank took Binta's hand, and they walked away. He glanced back once, then asked, "Mama, why do grown-ups cry so much?" "Sometimes people realize they've lost something important, and the sadness is bigger than they know how to carry." "Oh, I'm glad we didn't lose each other." "Me too, baby." That night, Frank asked if he could see Darren again sometime. Not because he liked him, but because he wasn't as scared anymore, because Darren was just a sad person, not a monster. Binta agreed to consider future meetings, knowing this was only the beginning of a complicated relationship that would unfold over years. Chapter 9. The Visible Wound. 3 more meetings happened over the following months, each one slightly less tense, though Binta never relaxed her vigilance or allowed Darren to forget his place at the absolute periphery of their lives. Frank reported that Darren talked about science, books, planets and stars, safe topics, nothing about history or feelings. Darren brought no gifts, made no promises, seemed to understand that rebuilding from nothing meant accepting scraps without asking for meals. The routine was working. Frank's questions were being answered, and Binta maintained absolute control. Then Frank's kindergarten announced Family Discovery Day. "Mama, can I invite him?" Frank asked, holding the flyer. "To help with my space presentation? Other kids have both parents?" Every instinct screamed no. But she couldn't refuse those hopeful eyes. Her email to Darren was explicit. "Frank has invited you to Family Discovery Day. Conditions: sit separately. Don't approach me unnecessarily. Speak only to Frank about science. Don't pretend we're family. 1 violation and you never attend another event." His response: "Understood. Thank you." The evening arrived. Binta got there early, watching other families, complete units laughing together. The nuclear family normalcy felt like judgment. Darren arrived separately, dressed simply, immediately helping Frank with his poster about the solar system. He kept the distance Binta required, spoke only to Frank, answered questions about planets in terms a kindergartner could understand. Watching them together, Frank's small hands pointing at drawings while Darren explained with patience, Binta felt something complicated twist in her chest. Not forgiveness, but recognition of what could have been. This ordinary father-son moment that Frank deserved but would only have in rationed doses. Other parents noticed Darren, recognized him. Whispers rippled, sympathetic glances at Binta. Frank presented his project with Darren beside him, explaining concepts when Frank got stuck. It was ordinary and heartbreaking. After presentations, parents mingled. Binta stood alone, but Frank kept bouncing between them, oblivious to the tension. One mother approached Binta sympathetically. "I saw the news. What you've accomplished is incredible. Thank you. And it's good that his father is trying now." "Better late than never." The words hit wrong. Better would have been not threatening my family. Late isn't the same as better. Late is just consequences arriving. The woman's smile faltered. "I didn't mean—" "Everyone means well, but no one who hasn't lived through this gets to decide when grace is appropriate." The woman moved away. Other parents gave Binta more space. She'd become something uncomfortable. The event ended. Frank hugged both goodbye, still operating in his innocent world. Darren lingered, wanting to say something. "Thank you for tonight," he said quietly. "Watching Frank present, seeing what you've taught him, it made me understand the depth of what I destroyed. You didn't have to let me see this. This doesn't change anything. I know. But I needed to say, seeing what you've created together shows me what I should have protected. I destroyed that possibility before it existed." Binta looked at him. She saw exhaustion, regret, a man living with consequences. It didn't excuse anything, but it complicated the simple narrative where Darren remained purely villainous. "You're right. You destroyed it. And this," she gestured at the space between them, "is all that's left. You're not his father in any meaningful way. You're just someone he knows. That's not going to change through showing up or trying or feeling bad." "I understand. Do you? Because every time you show up, there's risk. Risk that Frank will want more than I can safely give. Risk that he'll imagine we could somehow be a family, and I can't let him believe that lie. I'll never encourage those thoughts. See that you don't, because the moment I sense you're trying to become more than you are, you're done. Forever." She walked to her car, leaving Darren standing alone. Driving home, Frank chatted about his presentation, happy but not transformed. It was just an evening, not a turning point. Did you have fun? Binta asked. Yeah, he knows a lot about science stuff. Frank paused. But it was weird without you there beside me. Some things are just for fathers and sons. That's okay. I guess. Frank looked at her seriously. Mama, do other kids love their dads as much as I love you? The question broke and mended her heart simultaneously. I don't know, baby. But I know you have enough love for everyone who deserves it. Darren seems sad a lot. He is sad a lot. That's what happens when you make very bad choices. Will he ever stop being sad? I don't know. That's something he has to figure out himself. They drove home in comfortable silence. Frank fell asleep before they arrived, his head against the window, peaceful and secure. Binta carried him inside, tucked him into bed, and stood watching him sleep. This was her victory, not revenge against Darren, but building a life so full that his absence never created a hole that needed filling. Darren would continue at the margins, Frank would know him without needing him, and Binta would maintain the boundaries that kept them all safe. That was enough. That had always been enough. Chapter 10. Consequences. Spring arrived slowly in Portland, bringing with it a rhythm none of them had anticipated becoming their new normal. Meetings twice monthly in public spaces, always supervised, always on Binta's terms. Warren Pharmaceuticals dissolved completely. The lawsuits, the collapsed investor confidence, the public scandal, everything combined to end what had taken generations to build. Darren resigned, sold his shares, used proceeds to establish a victims fund. He moved into a regular apartment, took a consulting job helping pharmaceutical companies develop ethical practices, started living with consequences that couldn't be undone. Frank asked questions sometimes. Why doesn't he live in a big house? Does he have other kids? Binta answered honestly, never bad-mouthing Darren but never softening truth. Frank's kindergarten graduation arrived. Binta sat with her mother, brother and father. The family Darren had threatened, now thriving. Darren sat alone in the back. When Frank received his certificate, Binta glanced toward him and saw tears. She felt nothing about his pain, just acknowledgement that this was his reality, watching from margins. After the ceremony, Frank wanted a photo with both parents. They stood on either side, not touching, with Frank beaming between them. It looked exactly like what it was. Two separate people with a shared child. Summer brought Frank's 6th birthday, a party with neighborhood friends. Darren attended at Frank's request, helped with games, then left quietly. School started. Frank began 1st grade, made friends, lost his first tooth, learned to ride a bike. Life continued, and Darren remained peripheral. Months accumulated. Frank turned 7, started soccer, developed a passion for dinosaurs. All the ordinary miracles happened with Binta at the center, and Darren occasionally visible at the edges. They developed a routine, twice monthly visits, usually parks or museums, structured activities that gave them something to do without forcing intimacy. One evening Binta asked gently, "Are you glad you met him?" Frank thought carefully. "Yeah, it's good to know where I came from. But Mama? He's not my father. Not really. You're my parent. Both of them. Everything important." "Oh, baby," Binta pulled him close. "You're everything important to me too." "I love you bigger than the whole universe. I love you bigger than that times infinity." Frank giggled, and Binta held him, knowing these moments were her victory. Not revenge or forcing Darren to suffer, but building a life so full that his absence never created a hole needing filled. Darren would continue at the margins, showing up for scheduled times, being decent and consistent in his limited role. He'd continue living with consequences, knowing he'd destroyed his chance at something beautiful before it could exist. Years would unfold like this. Frank would grow up knowing his father, but never needing him. Binta would continue building her empire, raising her son, living the life she'd fought to create. One night, standing at her window watching Portland's lights while Frank slept, Binta thought about the woman she'd been, terrified and pregnant, standing outside a clinic in Seattle rain, facing impossible choices. She'd survived, built something beautiful from wreckage, raised a remarkable child who understood complexity without becoming bitter, won not by destroying Darren, but by creating a life so rich that his participation was optional rather than necessary. Binta slept peacefully, knowing she'd given Frank something Darren never could: absolute security in being loved completely. The kind of love that didn't depend on performance, the kind that made everything else survivable. And that was enough.